I was 32 years old the day I decided to stop hiding. It wasn't some carefully orchestrated plan. It was a slow burn of 1,000 quiet humiliations that finally caught fire. That morning, as my flight descended towards Cedar Springs, my palms were slick against the cheap leather of my old handbag, the one I'd deliberately chosen because it fit the image they expected, the modest middle child, the one who never made it. My siblings always had a way of making me feel small. It wasn't blatant cruelty. It was the kind of sophisticated belittling that only family can perfect. The tilted heads, the pitying smiles, the way they said, "How are you doing?" like the question already contained an answer. The truth was, I could have landed in that town in a private jet. I could have arrived in designer heels and a tailored outfit that cost more than my brother's monthly golf membership. But for 10 years, I had allowed their version of me to stand unchallenged. The struggling sister, the one they pitied, patronized, and quietly judged. I told myself it was easier that way, no explanations, no uncomfortable shifts in how they saw me. But that lie was growing heavier every year. My older brother James, at 40, was everything my parents had hoped for in a son. Ivy League, corner office in Manhattan, the Hamptons house. His life was a glossy magazine spread of corporate success. My younger sister Stephanie, at 28, had married into a banking fortune. Her wedding was featured in society pages. She floated through charity galas in silk dresses, perfectly coiffed, her life a performance of effortless perfection. And then there was me, Allison, the middle child, the odd one out who traded a college degree for a dream no one believed in. I still remember the dinner table the night I told them I was skipping college to build a business. My father didn't even look at me when he said I'd regret it for the rest of my life. My mother quietly cried into her napkin. James looked smug. Stephanie smirked. And I walked out with $200 in the quiet fury of someone who refuses to be defined by others' expectations. The years that followed were brutal. I failed more than I succeeded. I came close to losing everything twice. I worked 18-hour days fueled by stale coffee and instant ramen. I watched my friends climb ladders in stable jobs while I built and rebuilt something invisible to everyone but me. But I also learned, adapted, fought. And then I won. 3 years ago, my cybersecurity company patented a system that changed everything. 6 months ago, it was acquired for $50 million. I became the kind of woman my family would never have imagined me to be. And I told no one. For years, every holiday call, every half-hearted birthday greeting, every awkward visit home followed the same script. James would ask with feigned casualness if I was managing to pay rent. Stephanie would offer me her old clothes, like a benevolent queen gifting a peasant. My parents would make veiled comments about practical choices, and I would smile, nod, and let them keep their comfortable fiction. But this trip was different. 3 weeks ago, James called about Mom's fall and Dad's worsening dementia. He wanted a family meeting to discuss care costs. His voice was controlled but sharp, with that particular edge that always made me feel 12 years old again. "Contribute whatever you can," he had said. Whatever I can. I'd already quietly arranged top-tier private care, but they didn't know that. To them, I was still the sister with a 10-year-old car in a cramped apartment, always on the verge of collapse. The plane jolted as the wheels met the runway. My stomach twisted in a familiar knot. No matter how far I'd come, Cedar Springs had a way of shrinking me back into the girl I once was. Before the flight, I'd stood in front of my walk-in closet, staring at rows of tailored blazers, silk dresses, and shoes with price tags that could fund an entire semester of college, and then I'd reached for faded jeans, a sweater with a small hole at the cuff, and sneakers I'd had since before the acquisition. My assistant, Margot, had raised an eyebrow. "You're worth $50 million, she said. "And you're dressing like a broke grad student flying home for Christmas." "Because that's who they expect me to be," I replied, tying my hair back in a plain ponytail, "and I'm not ready to change their story just yet." On the flight, I'd stared at the clouds, trying to untangle why I'd let the charade live this long. Part of it was strategy. People who underestimate you give you power. In business, it's a weapon. In family, it's a shield. But beneath all the clever justifications was something more fragile. Their judgment had hurt me so deeply that hiding became easier than risking their reaction to the truth. It wasn't just pride, it was protection. 10 years ago, my brother had said, "Some people are meant to lead, others are meant to follow. There's no shame in accepting your limitations." I'd smiled politely, stepped outside, and cried under a frozen winter sky. He didn't know that hours earlier. I'd signed my company's first major international contract, but his words branded themselves on my skin anyway. The taxi ride from the airport passed through streets preserved in amber. The hardware store where Dad used to fix everything himself. The ice cream shop where Mom celebrated every B grade like it was an A. The park where I'd once sat on a rusted swing, sketching the rough idea that would become my first business. Everything looked smaller now, and yet, I felt like the one shrinking. The white colonial house loomed ahead, identical to the day I left. My heart thudded as I walked up the cracked stone path, my duffel bag another prop in this performance digging into my shoulder. James opened the door before I could knock. Cashmere sweater, expensive watch, hair perfectly in place. Even casual for him was curated. "Finally," he said, glancing at his watch. "We expected you hours ago. What happened? Did you have to take the bus from the airport?" His eyes flicked over my outfit, and I saw it the small, satisfied smile. "Good to see you too, James," I said evenly, hugging him briefly. His return hug was stiff, like always. Inside, Dad was thinner, his hair grayer, his mind already drifting in and out of clarity. Mom's movements were slow, careful after surgery, but her eyes lit up at the sight of me. "Allison, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You look—" She hesitated, searching for a kind word to describe my intentionally plain outfit. "Healthy. Are you eating enough on your budget?" I smiled. "I'm fine. Mom, how's your hip?" James hovered like a corporate angel of efficiency, already armed with binders, spreadsheets, and the smug weight of assumed responsibility. He spoke in medical terms as if he'd been training for this exact performance. The dinner that night played out like a well-rehearsed play. Stephanie swept in with designer bags and the perfect hair flip, handing out expensive gifts like trophies. For me, a gift card to a mid-range clothing store. "I thought you could use it for job interview clothes," she said sweetly. The table roared with laughter at my expense. We ate roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, and the taste of hierarchy. James and Stephanie swapped stories of promotions, galas, and renovations. When the spotlight turned to me, it was pity disguised as kindness. "What is it you do again?" Stephanie asked. "We design small business solutions," I said lightly. "Oh, still freelancing?" James nodded, like a doctor confirming a chronic but harmless condition. Dad leaned forward. "Are you still in that tiny apartment with the noisy neighbors?" I hadn't lived there in years. I now owned a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows. But why ruin their little fantasy? "I have a comfortable place," I said. "Well, comfort is relative," Stephanie laughed. Then came the meeting talk. Assisted living facilities, premium options, costs, plans, decisions made between we James and Stephanie with me conveniently outside the circle. They told me I wouldn't have to pay much. Maybe a token amount. Their generosity dripped with condescension. Every word landed like a quiet slap. I nodded, smiled, let them play their parts. But inside, something started to shift. I had let them hold this story for too long. Tomorrow, that would end. The next morning felt thick with something electric tension, expectation, maybe even inevitability. I woke up in the same small room I'd grown up in. The faded posters still on the wall like ghosts of a girl who no longer existed. The quilt on the bed smelled faintly of lavender detergent, and the old floor creaked beneath my bare feet as I walked to the window. Outside, the maple tree stood tall and unchanging, a living witness to every time I'd left this house feeling less than enough. It struck me how easily family could anchor you in a version of yourself you'd outgrown years ago. 10 years had passed, but stepping back into this house made me feel 17 again, raw, small, and desperate to prove something I didn't even have words for back then. I dressed deliberately that morning, another modest sweater, another pair of worn jeans, my armor. They expected the struggling sister. They'd get her until I decided otherwise. James was already downstairs, crisp and composed. Setting up his laptop and projector like this was a quarterly board meeting. The binder he'd prepared sat on the coffee table, thick with tabs and color-coded charts. Stephanie and Andrew arrived in coordinated business casual outfits, still wearing the faint smugness of people who believed the world had always bent slightly in their favor. Mom was in her armchair with a blanket draped over her lap. Dad sat beside her, confused but smiling softly when he saw us gathered. There was something achingly innocent about his expression. It almost made me want to protect him from the storm that was coming. James cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, like the CEO he always wanted to be. I took the least comfortable seat in the room, the wobbly ottoman near the corner. Somehow, that felt fitting. It was the chair I always ended up in as a kid when the important decisions happened. James clicked the remote, and the first slide of his PowerPoint appeared on the wall. Parental care options and financial considerations. Even the title made me want to laugh. My brother could turn anything into a corporate presentation, even our parents' future. He walked us through 3 facilities, each more luxurious than the last. Manicured lawns, on-site spas, gourmet dining. He spoke about medical care, memory support, social engagement opportunities, as if our parents' lives were bullet points on a pitch deck. "This one," he said, gesturing at the final slide, "is my preferred choice. It's a new continuing care community. Mom and Dad would have their own 2-bedroom apartment with access to top-tier medical support. It's close to the city, and the amenities are, well, as good as it gets." Mom murmured something soft, trying to hide the worry in her eyes as she saw the projected cost figures. The bottom line was staggering, even for people like James and Stephanie. "Of course," James said, his voice measured and deliberate. "Premium care comes with premium costs." Andrew leaned forward, ever the finance man, as if discussing market shares. "We've calculated how to distribute this equitably. Stephanie and I will cover 40%. James can manage 45% through his bonus structure. That leaves 15%, roughly $1,200 a month." The room shifted. All eyes turned to me. Stephanie cleared her throat delicately. "Allison, we know your situation is different from ours. If that amount is too much, maybe you can contribute in other ways. Maybe more visits, personal care, things like that." James nodded with practiced concern. "We don't want to create hardship. Perhaps 500 a month is more realistic for your budget." For your budget? They'd decided what I could and couldn't afford without ever asking me. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to hear just how deep their assumptions ran. James leaned back, looking very much like a benevolent monarch granting mercy to a loyal but broke subject. Stephanie smiled that careful smile she used when she thought she was being kind. And then Dad spoke. His voice was shaky, but clear. "Do you even have a steady job now, Allison? Last we talked, you were between projects." I opened my mouth to answer, but James interrupted smoothly, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "I actually have something in mind," he said. "My company has an entry-level marketing position. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. Salary, benefits, it would give you some security." Stephanie beamed. "That's so thoughtful. James, a real job with a real company. That would be such a big step for her." The air between us thickened. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not from shame, but from the quiet fury of a decade's worth of assumptions pressing against my ribs. In their world, I was someone who needed saving. In mine, I built empires. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm comfortable with my current situation." James exchanged a look with Stephanie. That silent language of siblings who'd always been on the same side of the line. Being comfortable and being secure are different things, he said. You can't couch surf forever. Couch surf, I repeated, incredulous. Well, last time we talked, you mentioned roommates, Stephanie said. And you never invite us to visit. That usually means, well, I almost laughed. I almost said my roommates are a house manager and a personal assistant. My place is a penthouse overlooking the skyline. But I didn't. I have a stable living situation, I said evenly. James frowned. But you don't even own a car anymore. I noticed you took a taxi from the airport. I have transportation arrangements that work for me, I replied, keeping my voice calm even as their words cut in that familiar, quiet way. James smirked. Allison has always been our free spirit. Not everyone needs material success to be happy. That's a convenient philosophy, he added just loud enough. When material success seems out of reach. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not loud or dramatic, just a clean, sharp break. 10 years of quiet belittlement. 10 years of playing small so they wouldn't have to adjust their worldview. It all narrowed into a single, quiet decision. I wasn't going to let them keep this version of me. Not anymore. Andrew, oblivious to the shift in the air, asked politely, So, Allison, can you manage the $500 a month? It's important we finalize this today. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I just need to make a quick call first. James frowned. Now's not the time for personal calls. We're in the middle of something important. I ignored him and called Margot. Hey, it's me. Is everything set for today? I listened to her answer, my heart beating steadily. Perfect. Go ahead with the arrival in 15 minutes. Yes, the front lawn is big enough. I hung up, turned back to my bewildered family, and smiled. Sorry about that. Just confirming my transportation. James narrowed his eyes. Did you arrange another taxi? Not exactly, I said. Stephanie tilted her head. Then what? I leaned back into the ottoman and looked at them with a calm I hadn't felt in years. We'll get to the numbers in a moment. But I actually have another care facility in mind. 20 minutes from here. Exceptional memory program. National recognition. It's private, though. No public listings. James scoffed. I researched every reputable facility in a 50-mile radius. If it was worth considering, it would have been on my list. I smiled. This one's different. I know it because I funded it. Silence. Stephanie laughed a little too loudly. What? I funded it, I repeated evenly. The Westbrook Senior Health Foundation is my project. James stared at me, blinking like he was trying to compute words that didn't make sense. That's ridiculous. You can't possibly fund something like that. You can't even afford a car. And right on cue, the low, rhythmic thump of rotor blades filled the air. The sound grew louder, unmistakable. Everyone turned toward the window as a sleek black helicopter descended over the front lawn, wind bending the maple tree branches. My mother gasped, What on earth? Should we call someone? Stephanie whispered, clutching Andrew's arm. I stood up, adjusted my sweater like I'd done it 1,000 times, and walked to the door. No need. That would be for me. 5 pairs of stunned eyes followed me. What do you mean? For you, James demanded, his voice rising. I looked over my shoulder. Remember when you said I couldn't afford a car? I opened the door. The helicopter touched down. The pilot waved at me through the window like this was just another Tuesday. My ride is here, I said. Mom fainted. Dad just stared, mouth open. Stephanie's hand tightened around Andrew's arm like she was trying to anchor herself to reality. James looked as if someone had told him gravity was optional. When Mom wakes up, I said calmly, tell her I'll be back in an hour. We'll finish this conversation at my place. The helicopter can take us all. I stepped outside, the wind from the blades whipping through my hair as if punctuating the decade-long lie unraveling in real time. The helicopter blades beat against the air like a living pulse, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. As I stepped toward it, the wind whipped through my hair, snapping at my sweater and jeans. It wasn't lost on me how symbolic this moment was. For years, They'd pictured me arriving in this house as the sister with nothing, no car, no house, no future. And now, here I was, stepping into a helicopter, my helicopter. Rick, my pilot, gave me a slight nod from the cockpit. "Morning, Miss Parker," he said through the headset. I climbed inside, the leather seat cool against my palms as I buckled in. Through the large, curved window, I could see my family clustered in the doorway of our childhood home. Stephanie clutched Andrew's arm. James had his hands jammed in his pockets, stiff as a statue. Mom was on the couch just inside, fanning herself weakly as she regained consciousness. Dad stood near the steps, bewildered but oddly calm. "Everything all right?" Miss Parker, Rick asked. "Just family drama," I said with a laugh that was half nerves, half adrenaline. You know how it is. "Want me to circle the house a couple of times?" he asked playfully. I smiled at his dry humor, the kind that had gotten me through more than a few tense arrivals at board meetings. "No. Straight to the estate. We'll be bringing them back with us soon enough." As the helicopter lifted off, I felt my body sink back into the seat, a rush of air swirling around us. The white colonial house grew smaller beneath me, looking quaint and fragile against the green patchwork of lawns and woods. My chest tightened not from fear, but from a strange, almost childlike ache. For so long, that house had represented my smallness, my not enoughness, and now I was watching it from above. It wasn't about the helicopter. It never was. It was about finally reclaiming the narrative they had written for me without my permission. The flight was short. As the wooded hills opened up, the estate came into view. The main house, a renovated stone mansion, rose from the center of 30 acres like something out of a magazine spread. Lush gardens, a small lake catching the morning light, and the helipad tucked neatly beside the circular driveway. When I first bought it, I'd done so quietly, almost guiltily, as though my success had to be hidden, even from me. Rick set us down with the gentle precision. As the rotor slowed, I could see Margot waiting by the front steps, tablet in hand. She always carried herself with quiet efficiency, never gawking at the extravagance around her. She'd been there when I was eating ramen on a mattress on the floor. She'd believed in this long before the world did. "How did the grand reveal go?" she asked, handing me a bottle of water as I stepped onto the lawn. "My mother fainted," I said dryly. James looked like someone told him gravity was a rumor. Stephanie's clutching her husband like we just landed on Mars. "So, standard family meeting?" I laughed, the tension easing a little. "Something like that. They'll be here in about an hour. Make sure everything's ready." "It's all set. Chef Thomas is finishing lunch. Guest rooms are prepared in case they stay. And the family portfolio's on the coffee table," she reported. The portfolio, a thick leather-bound binder containing everything I had set in motion months ago: the trust funds, the Westbrook Senior Health Foundation documents, the legal provisions for my parents' lifetime care. It wasn't just wealth, it was power. A power I'd built alone, brick by brick. While they told each other I was failing, I looked around at the estate. The house's stone facade reflected the soft morning light. The lake glimmered through the trees. The winding gravel path curved toward the west wing I'd had renovated into an office space for my foundation. It was beautiful. It was mine. And now, for the first time, it wouldn't have to be a secret anymore. 1 hour later, the sound of rotor blades filled the air again. My family was arriving. The helicopter touched down, and I saw them through the tinted glass, Mom clutching her purse like it was a life vest. Dad's eyes wide with wonder. Stephanie's perfect hair whipped in the wind, Andrew steadying her. And James, his jaw tight, his mind already trying to rationalize what he was seeing. As they stepped onto the driveway, their eyes lifted toward the house. The size of it seemed to swallow their words. Stephanie's mouth fell open. James blinked like someone trying to reboot a crashed system. "Welcome to my home," I said simply, meeting them at the steps. Mom's voice trembled. "This is yours." "Yes, Mom, mine." James found his voice first, though it cracked a little. "Regional office of what?" I turned and gestured toward the glass doors leading into the foyer of Parker Security Solutions, my company. Inside, the house opened into a soaring foyer with polished stone floors, tall windows, and a chandelier that scattered sunlight like broken diamonds. I'd deliberately chosen subtle elegance over ostentation, but to people who still pictured me in a cramped apartment, it might as well have been a palace. We entered the living room, the windows framing the gardens and lake beyond. Everyone sat stiffly on the white sofas except James, who remained standing like he was bracing himself. "Your company," he repeated, as if the words themselves were absurd. "Yes," I said calmly, lowering myself into the armchair opposite them. "I founded Parker Security Solutions 8 years ago. We build cybersecurity infrastructure for small and mid-sized businesses. 6 months ago, Nexus Technologies acquired us for just over $50 million. I stayed on as division head. I also retained significant equity." The silence was almost physical. Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth. Andrew let out a low, involuntary whistle before catching himself. Mom blinked rapidly. "50 million, Dad repeated slowly. "Yes, Dad." I smiled softly. 50 million. "But you," Stephanie began, then stopped, gesturing helplessly at my clothes, the old duffel bag still by the door. "I live simply," I said, my tone light but firm. "That was always my choice." James finally sat down. "Why didn't you say anything?" His voice wasn't angry so much as wounded, like someone realizing the world wasn't quite as neatly arranged as he thought. "Because every time I tried to talk about what I was building, you dismissed it." I answered without hesitation. "It was always that computer thing Allison does. Or her little projects. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe." Mom's eyes glistened. "But you let us think you were struggling all these years." "You were comfortable thinking I was struggling," I corrected gently. "It fit the story you'd already written for me. The one where James is the successful one. Stephanie marries into wealth, and I'm the odd one out who never quite figured it out." Stephanie flinched. I didn't say it to hurt her, but truth has a way of cutting deeper than insults ever could. Andrew, always more direct than my siblings, asked, "So the foundation you mentioned earlier, the Westbrook Senior Health Foundation." I gestured to the portfolio Margot had placed on the table. "I founded it 3 years ago. It operates a private senior care community specializing in memory support. That's where Mom and Dad will go if they choose. Their expenses are already covered through a trust, permanently." James leaned forward, his executive tone faltering. You did all this without telling us." "Yes," I said simply, "because if I'd told you, you would have tried to control it, or explain why it wouldn't work, or minimize it to fit what you could understand. I didn't need that. I just needed to build it." My mother covered her mouth, tears pooling in her eyes. My father reached out and touched my hand, his palm warm and familiar. "I always knew you were different." "Allison," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, but I didn't know how much. His words undid something tight in my chest. Margot appeared quietly at the doorway. "Lunch is ready," she said. I nodded and turned back to my family. "Shall we?" They followed me into the dining room, vaulted ceilings, a long oak table, flowers in the center, everything elegant, but not pretentious. Chef Thomas stood at the far end, plates laid out like an art installation. Stephanie stared at the table settings like she'd stepped into a dream she wasn't sure she belonged in. As we sat, the shock began to morph into something more complicated: curiosity, unsteady admiration, a little shame. Stephanie finally whispered, "You really built all this?" I met her eyes, calm. "Yes, I did." For the first time in a long time. She didn't have a clever remark. The clink of silverware against porcelain filled the silence, like tiny echoes of everything unspoken. We sat around the long oak dining table beneath the soft light streaming through the tall windows. My family shifted in their seats, still processing the reality they'd just stepped into. Stephanie's fingers traced the edge of her wine glass without drinking. James stared down at his plate, cutting his roasted salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, like the act might help him slice through his own disbelief. It was almost funny. For years, their confidence had filled every room, their voices always louder, their plans always more important, their choices always the standard by which everything else was measured. But here, at my table, in a house they didn't even know existed, their certainty seemed to falter, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the small, invisible sister sitting on the edge of the conversation. I felt whole. Mom's voice broke the silence. It was soft, uncertain, like someone stepping into cold water. "Why didn't you tell us, Allison?" Her question hung in the air, thick with something more than curiosity. It was hurt real. Maternal hurt. I took a slow sip of water, gathering the right words, because every time I tried to share my dreams, you all made it clear you didn't believe in them. Not because you were cruel, but because they didn't fit your idea of what success looked like. Stephanie set her glass down with a soft click. "That's not fair." "It's not." I looked at her evenly. "Do you remember the year I skipped college? The way you all treated me like I'd thrown my life away. James was the golden son, and you were the perfect daughter. I was the cautionary tale, the example of what not to become." James shifted uncomfortably. "We were worried about you." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You were worried about the version of me you invented. You decided who I was before I'd even figured it out myself. And then every time I didn't fit that image, you pushed me back into it. For once." James didn't argue. He just looked at me. Really looked at me. It was almost strange seeing him search my face like someone reading a language they'd never bothered to learn before. Andrew cleared his throat gently. "So, Allison, if I may, you built a company worth $50 million and never said a word. That takes some serious restraint." I gave him a small, wry smile. When no one's listening, silence isn't that hard. Stephanie crossed her arms, a defensive habit from childhood. "We would have listened." I leaned forward. "Would you, or would you have smiled politely and called it that little tech thing again? Would you have compared me to James's Ivy League path? Or told me it wasn't too late to marry someone wealthy, like you did at Christmas 6 years ago?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't deny it. I didn't say anything because I got tired of trying to prove myself to people who didn't want to see me. I continued, softer now. "It was easier to let you underestimate me than to fight for space I should have already had." For a moment, no one spoke. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Dad, though often lost in the fog of his illness, reached across the table and rested his trembling hand over mine. His palm was thin, cool, but steady. "I always knew you were strong," he whispered. "I just didn't understand what that meant." I squeezed his hand gently. "I know, Dad." James exhaled, pushing his plate away. "So, this is why you didn't say anything during the meeting this morning." I nodded slowly. "Yes. I wanted to hear what you really thought of me before I tore down the walls of that little story you've been telling yourselves for years." Stephanie rubbed her forehead, whispering, "God," under her breath. Andrew, ever practical, cut through the emotion with a question. "So the facility, the Westbrook Foundation, tell us about it. What exactly did you build?" I reached for the leather portfolio Margot had set at the end of the table and slid it open. The rustle of the pages felt oddly grounding. I flipped through charts, photos, plans. Not business vanity, but proof. Evidence of years of quiet work they'd never seen. "It's a memory care facility and continuing care community," I explained. "I started it after Dad's diagnosis. I didn't like the sterile, lifeless institutions I saw, so I built something better. It's private, quiet, centered around dignity and community. Every room feels like a home, not a hospital, and because it's funded by my foundation, cost will never be an issue for Mom and Dad, ever." James leaned closer, scanning the documents. "You've already set up the trust." "Yes." "The legal provisions, already signed and locked in. And you did all of this without telling us." I met his eyes. "Yes, James. Because if I had, you would have turned it into a committee. And I didn't want your permission to do something I could already do myself." His jaw tightened. Not out of anger, I realized, but out of the slow, uncomfortable awareness that for the first time in our lives, I had outmaneuvered him. Stephanie gave a shaky laugh. And here I was, giving you gift cards for job interview clothes. The irony hung in the air between us. For years, she'd treated me like a stray cat she occasionally felt charitable toward. Mom covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, Allison, all this time we thought you were barely scraping by. I know, I said gently, and I let you think that. James finally spoke again, his voice quieter. Why? Because the truth wouldn't have changed how you saw me. I said, not then. I had to stop trying to make you see it. I needed to succeed for me, not for your approval, but I guess I also wanted this moment. My voice softened the moment when you realized I was never the one who needed saving. Silence blanketed this table again. But it was different now. Not thick with judgment, just shifting weight. Old hierarchies cracking at the edges. After a long pause, Stephanie looked around the room, the walls, the light, the quiet elegance of it all. You built something incredible, she whispered, almost like an apology. I felt something ease inside me. I didn't need her apology, but hearing the words still mattered. James leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I misjudged you, he admitted. All of us did. I tilted my head. You never really tried to judge me at all. You just assumed. He nodded, the admission clear in his silence. Margot entered the room quietly, coffee and dessert in the garden. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my sweater. Let's go outside. The afternoon sun had softened into gold by the time we gathered in the garden. The lake shimmered, dragonflies skimming the surface like tiny fragments of light. We sat on the patio furniture overlooking the water, coffee cups in hand, the earlier tension gradually unraveling. For the first time in years, the conversation didn't orbit around James's promotions or Stephanie's galas. There was no quiet pity directed at me, no sideways glances. Dad asked about how I'd built the company. Mom wanted to know where I lived now. Andrew was fascinated by the security protocol I'd patented. And James asked questions, real ones, not laced with condescension. I told them about the sleepless years, the failures, the nights when my dreams nearly collapsed. I told them about the ramen noodles, the burned-out laptops, the endless cold calls. I told them how my company grew from 2 people in a cramped co-working space to a multi-million-dollar acquisition. And for the first time, they actually listened. It wasn't the helicopter that had changed everything. It was the truth, raw, unvarnished, undeniable. As the sun sank lower and the cicadas began their evening song, I felt the weight of 10 years loosen from my chest, not disappear entirely, but shift. Stephanie leaned back in her chair, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. You know, it's strange. I spent so long thinking I was the one who had it all figured out. And now I feel like I've been watching the wrong movie. I gave a small smile, maybe we all have. James raised his coffee cup slightly in a half-toast, to the sister we didn't know we had. My chest tightened, not with pain this time, but something warmer, something almost like healing. The lake shimmered beneath the softening sky, catching streaks of late afternoon light for a long time. None of us spoke. It wasn't a tense silence like before. It was something different, looser, uncertain, but real. My siblings weren't looking at me like the struggling little sister anymore. They were seeing me, really seeing me. And that shift hung between us like the quiet before the first honest conversation of a lifetime. Dad's hand was warm and a little shaky as he rested it on the armrest of his chair, staring at the water like he was trying to hold on to this moment before the fog of his illness pulled him somewhere else. It hit me then, like a gentle ache in my chest. How much time had passed? 10 years of unspoken distance. 10 years of living in parallel lives that only brushed at the edges during holidays and forced family gatherings. I leaned back, letting the sound of the wind rustle through the trees. Stephanie broke the silence first. When did you know? She asked quietly. When did you know it was going to work, the company? Everything. I thought about that for a long moment. There wasn't one moment. I admitted. It wasn't a light switch. It was thousands of little moments. Most of them were painful. Most of them were lonely. But the third year, when we patented the security protocol that changed everything, I remember sitting in my tiny office at 2 a.m. and realizing I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was building something real. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You almost lost everything before that, didn't you? Yes, I said honestly, twice. I had to pawn my grandmother's bracelet to pay for hosting servers 1 month. I maxed out my credit cards. I slept on a mattress on the floor for almost 2 years. Nobody saw any of that. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I could see the faint crack in his armor now, not the arrogant, untouchable brother I grew up with, but a man confronting his own reflection. I spent years thinking you were reckless, that you just didn't want to be responsible. Turns out you were taking bigger risks than any of us ever have. I tilted my head slightly. Maybe we were just playing different games. Stephanie let out a soft laugh, not mocking this time, but almost wistful. You played to build something real. I played to maintain a picture. She turned her wedding ring absent-mindedly. My life looks perfect on the outside. But the truth is, Andrew and I have been in counseling for a year. The charity galas, the country club, it all feels so hollow sometimes. Andrew didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded in quiet agreement. We've both been trying to keep up an image. It's exhausting. Hearing those words felt like a shift under my feet. For so long, I'd pictured them as the ones with everything. The glossy success story. The golden children. But they had been struggling too, just differently. Their cages had gold bars. Mine was made of assumptions and low expectations. James's voice was quieter when he finally spoke. I hate about 60% of my daily life. James' mom started, startled by the confession. He held up his hand gently. I've never said it out loud before, but it's true. I followed every rule, ticked every box, built the exact life that was expected of me. Ivy League, the firm, the house in the Hamptons, and every day, I wake up feeling like I'm living someone else's story. The confession hit me harder than I expected. I had built my entire identity around proving James wrong. And now here he was, sitting across from me, stripped of all that certainty. I thought. He continued, voice low. If you failed, it would mean I was right. About everything. But you didn't fail. You succeeded. On your terms. And it makes me wonder if I ever lived on mine. The air around us thickened with something I couldn't name. Not guilt, not victory, something closer to grief. Not for what we'd done wrong, but for the years we'd spent not really knowing each other at all. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Me too. I've spent so much time being the polished one, the one who made the right choices. But every night I lie in that giant house and I feel empty, like I traded my voice for applause. Her words caught me off guard, not because I didn't believe her, but because I never thought I'd hear her admit something like that. Dad turned to Mom, his eyes softer than I'd seen in a long time. We raised them to think success only looks one way. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We did what we thought was right. I reached for her hand gently. I know, Mom. But life's bigger than those old definitions. We just didn't know how to talk about it then. Stephanie looked at me, her voice trembling a little. Why didn't you tell us before? Allison. Not the big reveal with the helicopter, just earlier, quietly. I took a deep breath, the honest kind that doesn't hide behind poise. Because a part of me liked the idea of this moment, the look on your faces, the shock. I wanted to prove everyone wrong in one big dramatic sweep. And maybe, I admitted softly, that was selfish. Stephanie gave a soft, uneven laugh through the tears building in her eyes. It was very extra. I laughed too, and even James cracked a faint smile. Yeah, I said. I wanted the shock. But the truth is, seeing your faces today doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. I thought it would feel like victory. It doesn't. It just feels heavy. James nodded, his expression more honest than I'd ever seen it, because this was never about money. No, I whispered, it wasn't. The conversation drifted. Softer now, less defensive. They asked me about the company not like they were humoring me this time, but because they genuinely wanted to understand how I built it, why I chose to stay modest, why I never flaunted my success. I told them about the foundation, about the schools we'd built overseas, about choosing purpose over performance. James grew quiet after that, watching me carefully. "You built a whole life we never bothered to ask about," he said finally. "And we built one you probably didn't want to ask about either." I didn't deny it. Evening crept in slowly. The lake turned from gold to silver, the air cooling as the first crickets began their nighttime chorus. The earlier stiffness between us was unraveling thread by thread. Mom looked at me suddenly, her eyes still red but clearer than before. "Will you stay, Allison?" Here I asked softly. "In Cedar Springs, at least sometimes. I want you closer. Not as the girl we used to think you were, but as you." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. I hadn't realized how much I'd longed to hear something like that. "Yes," I said simply. "I'd like that." Stephanie leaned back with a deep breath, like she'd been holding it for years. "I think I want to do something different too. Real charity work. Not just galas and photo ops. Maybe even volunteer at the Westbrook Foundation." I smiled at her. "Genuinely, we'd love to have you." And then James surprised us all. "I've been offered a teaching position," he said quietly. "Business school. Less money, less prestige, but more meaningful. I think I'm going to take it." Mom gasped softly. "James, are you sure?" "For the first time in years," he said, meeting my eyes. "I think I am." There was no applause, no dramatic declarations, just quiet resolve. And somehow, that felt louder than anything. Later, after dinner, I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. James joined me, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. He handed me one. "You've done well for yourself," he said. No edge in his voice this time, just quiet admiration. "Thank you." He raised his glass slightly, to the sister who never needed saving. I clinked mine against his, to the brother who finally stopped pretending to have all the answers. He chuckled softly, "Touché." We stood there for a long time. 2 grown siblings who had finally laid down the weight of old roles. For once. There was no competition, no resentment, just the quiet possibility of something better. The morning sunlight spilled into the breakfast room, warm and golden, falling over the table like it was trying to bless a new beginning. It was strange how different everything felt now. Just yesterday, this family had been locked inside old stories, mine written in the margins as the failure, theirs written in gold ink. And now, after one unexpected flight, a table full of confessions, and a night of long overdue honesty, the story was changing right in front of me. Chef Thomas had outdone himself: flaky croissants, warm omelets, fresh fruit, the kind of breakfast that used to exist only in my private, hidden world. But this morning, it wasn't a wall between me and them. It was shared. Mom sat beside Dad, carefully buttering a croissant. Her movements slower now but steady. James sipped his coffee. Not the self-important executive sipping espresso in some Manhattan boardroom, but just my brother, and Stephanie, hair pulled back, dressed simply for once. Looked more like the sister I remembered before everything became a performance. Dad glanced around the table, blinking as if taking in something fragile. "I don't remember the last time we were all together like this," he said softly. My chest tightened. "Me neither." Mom looked at me with a different kind of gaze this time, not the worried, patronizing look I'd grown used to, but something gentler, quieter. "You built something extraordinary, Allison. But more than that, you built yourself." I swallowed hard. It took a long time to believe I could. James set his cup down carefully. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone." I gave him a small, understanding smile. Maybe not, but I did, and I'm stronger because of it. Stephanie leaned forward, elbows on the table, a posture she never used to allow herself. Do you ever regret it? Hiding everything for so long? The question landed softly, like she wasn't trying to challenge me anymore, just understand. I thought about the years of quiet, the conversations where I bit my tongue, the holidays where I swallowed every patronizing remark like a bitter pill. At first, no, I said slowly. I thought it was my shield. I thought if they underestimated me, they couldn't hurt me anymore. But over time, the silence became its own kind of prison. I got used to being invisible, and sometimes I started believing their story about me. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were thin and cool, but they held steady. I'm sorry, sweetheart, for not seeing you. I'm sorry too, I whispered back, for letting resentment grow where trust should have been. James cleared his throat, his voice quieter than usual. I was proud of being the responsible one, the example. But honestly, I was terrified. Terrified that if your way worked, then maybe everything I built wasn't really mine, it was just what was expected. That admission cut through the last of the old noise between us. Stephanie exhaled, almost laughing at herself, and I was too busy keeping my picture-perfect life from cracking to see anything beyond it. You've been quietly doing something incredible all this time, Allison. And I was too busy judging the cover to even open the book. There was no bitterness left in her tone, just quiet recognition. Andrew placed his hand over hers. We both were. I didn't try to give them comfort. I didn't need to. For the first time, we were sitting in the truth together, and that was enough. I leaned back, looking at all of them, my family. Messy, flawed, imperfect, but real. At last. Mom, Dad, I said softly. I want to keep the Westbrook Foundation close to home. I'm going to split my time between the city and here. I want you to have the best care, but I also want us to rebuild something honest. Mom's eyes welled up again. I'd like that very much. James smiled faintly. You know, this house doesn't scare me as much as it did last night. I laughed. That's good, because you're welcome here anytime. Stephanie bit her lip, then said, I want to start volunteering at Westbrook, not just galas, real work, something that matters. Andrew nodded. And I've been thinking about shifting into nonprofit investments. Maybe we could build something together. Allison, not for the image, for the impact. I felt something warm spread through me, a kind of quiet pride I hadn't felt in years, for once. We weren't trying to one-up each other. We were building something that could stand side by side. James cleared his throat again, almost sheepishly this time. I've already emailed the dean about that teaching position. I think I'm going to take it. I want to actually like what I do when I wake up. I raised my cup of coffee in his direction. Good. It's about time you started living for yourself, not for the world watching. He smirked. Took a helicopter landing to get me there. But hey, progress is progress. We all laughed, then real laughter. Not polite, not performative, the kind that melts years of distance. Later, after breakfast, we gathered in the garden for a family photo. We hadn't done that in years, not because we couldn't, but because it had never felt real. The sun was warm on our faces, the lake behind us catching little sparks of light for the first time. I didn't feel like I was on the outside of my own family. When everyone started packing up to leave, Mom lingered by the front steps. Will you come for Sunday dinner next week, she asked, almost shyly. Nothing fancy, just family. Just family. I repeated softly, I'd love that. James gave me a quiet side hug. Stephanie pressed her forehead against mine like we used to when we were kids. And Dad, sweet Dad, squeezed my hand with all the strength he had left. When the helicopter finally lifted them back toward Cedar Springs, I stood on the terrace and watched it rise, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in years. The truth was, I could have revealed everything to them years ago. I could have flaunted it, rubbed it in their faces, made them feel small the way they'd made me feel. But the moment I'd imagined for so long their shock, their awe wasn't the real victory. The real victory was standing here now, not as the poor middle child, not as the invisible one, but as myself, fully, unapologetically. I walked back into the house, sunlight spilling across the floor, and let the silence settle around me. Not the lonely kind, the peaceful kind. I turned toward the camera on my kitchen counter, the one I used to film quiet updates for the few subscribers who'd once followed my early entrepreneurship journey. I switched it on, took a deep breath, and let my voice flow out into the lens like it was flowing straight from my heart. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, I began softly, you know how heavy it can feel. Sometimes the weight of their version of you can crush your voice before you ever get to use it. But one day, you stop living for their approval, and you start living for your truth. That's the day everything changes. I let a small smile tug at my lips. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt unseen, I hope this reminds you you don't owe anyone the smaller version of yourself. You get to decide when to step into the light. I looked directly into the lens, voice steady and warm. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave me a comment if you've ever had your own moment of finally being seen. Your story matters too. The red light blinked off. Outside, the world was still bright. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt weightless,